So thank you to everyone who has joined us today. I'm Kate from the CTO, and we've got Danielle Edwards here from the Point-to-Point Transport Commission. The Community Transport Organization acknowledges the Camaragal people as the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet and work. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands across New South Wales upon which our members provide community transport services. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, the holders of knowledge, tradition, and culture. We recognize their ongoing connection to lands, waters, and community, and say thank you for the preservation of country across thousands of generations. So I will hand over to Danielle now, and we'll get started. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kate. And thank you everybody for joining today and having Point to Point come along for this session. Kate reached out and let me know that, given that there's been a lot of change in the community transport space of recent, there are a few questions around authorisation, the audit process and what exactly is audited. And the passenger service levy. So I thought we would go into some detail around that today to answer some of your questions, or at least hopefully answer the majority of them. If throughout the presentation you do have any questions, please feel free to jump in. Oftentimes the question comes to mind when we're in the moment rather than at the end. So please let me know if you do have any questions along the way. This presentation is largely based on the content that we cover in our authorisation support sessions, which we offer to new providers. If that's something that you're interested in being a part of or coming along to, please reach out at the end of this session, either through Kate or through myself, and we can arrange for that to happen as well if you still had some sort of lingering questions to cover. Throughout the presentation, I'll try and answer some of the questions that were sent in prior to today. But of course, if there's further questions that pop up, I'm happy to answer them either along the way or at the end. Kate, you did a beautiful acknowledgement of country, so we'll continue forward. So I'm Danielle, I'm from the Point-to-Point Transport Commission, and I think I am joined here today with Marcus. So we work in the education and engagement branch at the Commission. I'm based regionally out here in Dubbo, and Marcus is based in Sydney. And we come along to events such as these to provide as much information to industry as possible. For those of you who are new to Point-to-Point Transport, we are the regulator of point-to-point services. So that's travel in a vehicle of 12 seats or less on a time and route of a person's choosing for a fare. Our main focus is obviously on safety. We are regulators of safety laws. We don't actually make the laws. And one of the ways that we, or two of the ways that we ensure that safety is through education primarily, and then following that with industry compliance. And that's through things like the auditing process and with our compliance officers, either in covert or more obvious type of operations. I won't go into this too much, but as most of you are aware, CHSP funding changed sort of midway through last year. And as a result of that change of distribution of funding, if you weren't already under point-to-point transport, you are now. And so along with that has come the changes, and you've needed to become authorised. So we'll go through some of those obligations and things as we go along. I'm quite happy to send this presentation out at the end of this session. It's got some links in here with a bit more information on the CHSP funding changes.
Thanks for that. And I will put it, we have a section on point-to-point within the members only resource section, so I can pop a copy of it in there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks.
So as I mentioned, you would now probably either be authorised or becoming authorised if you're new to the industry. And with that comes some obligations that you need to comply with. So that includes point-to-point safety standards, compliance with record keeping, and we're going to have a look at what exactly you need to keep records on a little bit later. Compliance with the requirements and payment unless you're exempt of the passenger service levy, and payment of the annual authorisation fee. In regards to the PSL, community transport providers have an exemption that lasts for 2 years on CHSP funded trips from midway of July last year. So the 2-year period started then. This is just a very quick breakdown of the authorisation fees. This was for the last financial year, but these fees are payable annually. And it's calculated on the number of passenger service trips that you conduct throughout the year. So obviously the more trips that you conduct, the greater your authorisation fees are. In regard to record keeping, so the regulation sets out 6 main areas of responsibility for which records must be kept. These include vehicle standards, and that includes things like registration and vehicle maintenance, replacement of tyres, anything done by a mechanic or an engineer, for example, if it's a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Your safety management system, also called the SMS, which is basically a large safety document that you tailor for your particular business. We get a lot of questions when we talk about the safety management system about the risk register. This is where a lot of people sort of get tripped up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go along. Insurance of your vehicles and your business, information availability, so how you provide vehicle and driver details to the hirer or your participants. Driver management, including their eligibility, disqualifying offences, and their competency and training, particularly in regards to wheelchair accessible vehicles, and incident reporting. So with regard to drivers, booking service providers, which is essentially what community transport providers are recognised as under point-to-point law, you have the responsibility to ensure that your drivers have an unrestricted Australian driver's licence. It's not probationary. And they've held it for at least 12 months in the preceding 4 years, and that they've passed medical and background checks, including a criminal check. We often get asked, do drivers need to have, or is it compulsory to have a PT code? And the answer to that is no, it's not compulsory. However, we do strongly encourage it because you can access what's called our driver vehicle dashboard, and that PT code allows you to have really good oversight around changes to your driver. So, outside of work hours, if, in the unfortunate case, they're caught, driving under the influence or whatever, that will actually flag in the system, so that you will be able to stay up to date with all of that. It's important to note too that your drivers who drive any of your wheelchair accessible vehicles must be competent in the safe loading, transporting and unloading of those passengers. So that's some sort of obligations you need to keep in mind in regard to your drivers, regardless of whether they're a carer or primarily a driver. The other requirement you need to have as a booking service provider is that you need to display a retro-reflective sign at the rear of the driver's side of the vehicle, so that people can clearly identify you as a booking service provider vehicle. So I know that retro-reflective signs are not the easiest to get your hands on. We do have a small supply of them at the Commission, which we can send out, but work sort of communicate amongst yourselves around, sort of having all of that available to you. All right, we get lots of questions from community transport around passenger service levy. So this is a levy that is added to trips. It's about $1.20. And that can either be absorbed by you as the provider or passed on to your passengers. Service providers need to register as a taxpayer through the industry portal on the Point-to-Point Transport Commission website to pay for this levy. If you do fewer than 600 passenger service trips a year, you only need to do or pay your passenger service levy annually. But if you do more than 600 passenger service trips, you would be required to pay monthly. And all that is sort of covered in that table there. As I said, currently CTO have an exemption for the, covering the 2 years since the changeover of CHSP funding. But it's also important to know that if you are providing services in a remote area, you may also be exempt from the levy. So the map is not particularly clear, unfortunately, to show that clear distinction of where that is applicable, but you can contact our information contact centre to get more clarity on whether you qualify for that exemption. Okay, so these were some of the questions that came through around the passenger service levy ahead of today's session. So I'll go through and sort of answer some of those. And if you have any other questions, please flag that with me. So the question is, where a vehicle travels to a regional centre with just one full cost non-funded client on board and remains there with just that client all day, that is, it's not hired out to anybody else, we may claim 4 trips through our funding, 1 to a medical centre, 1 to a place for lunch, 1 to a specifically requested shop, and then the trip home. Does this attract 1 levy or 4? Does it make a difference if the total cost is only allocated to 1 leg of the journey in our system and the rest are entered at no fee? If the booking is for a round trip, even if there are a number of stops, as long as that vehicle is not available for hire any time that you have that particular person, then only 1 passenger service levy would apply in this particular scenario. And it doesn't really matter what part of the trip you apply that PSL to. It makes the most sense that it would be the first leg of the journey, but you can do it through your system however you see fit. I hope that answers that question. The next question is very similar, but in this particular case, it's asking if you have 2 people, 2 full cost clients that do this same trip and it's not available for hire in that period of time. Does 1 levy for each, is it 1 levy, sorry, for each of the clients, or is it 1 levy for each client for every part of the trip? So in this case, again, the levy is calculated on each passenger service transaction. So each client attracts just the 1 levy. So in this scenario, because you've got 2 people, it's got 2 levies. Again, so long as that vehicle is not available for hire in between that period of time that you have those 2 clients, then only 1 levy per passenger would apply. Many community transport services provide some subcontracted transport through their local taxi companies, especially for local trips. When the taxi is providing a Transport for New South Wales funded trip to the client, would this be exempt from the levy as the trip is indirectly funded through Transport for New South Wales? I get the logic behind this question, because it's almost like, well, the funding kind of travels with the person, so therefore the exemption should also travel, but not in this case. So in this scenario, the passenger service levy would still be applicable. If in this case it was 2 authorised service providers, but one of the service providers asks another provider to do that trip for them, then as long as they agree that either one of them pays that passenger service levy, then that's fine. It doesn't matter. So if you're an authorised provider, but you authorise out to John, who's another BSP, either yourself or John can pay for that PSL within that trip. However, if you are an unauthorised service provider and you are subcontracting out to somebody who is an authorised BSP, then that BSP would automatically be, would have to pay the passenger service levy. I hope that all kind of makes sense. Any more questions on the passenger service levy before I move on to safety management systems? No? Okay. So the safety management system, or SMS for short, is basically your living safety document. So we call it living because it's something that you're going to keep coming back to time and time again. Obviously, the bigger your business is, the more often you're going to come back to it. And the smaller your business is, you might only come to it every sort of 6 to 12 months and make adjustments. It's tailored to your business. So, what an SMS would look like for a taxi service provider, for example, would look very different to what it would look like for a CTO provider. Your safety management system is seldom done just in isolation unless you're a provider who is also the driver. So you would do it in consultation with, other drivers within your organisation, within your staff, and with relevant professionals, because you look at who's responsible for what kind of training they have to have, and that sort of thing. But we'll go into that in a moment. Your SMS must include a risk register, which identifies and records any possible hazards, including the 9 mandatory ones, that could happen throughout your provision of services. Within that, you develop control measures to prevent any kind of incidences from happening and to mitigate any safety issues. And then you come back and you reevaluate those controls and make sure that, they're kind of meeting the mark and they're doing the things that you need them to do. And if they're not, you would then modify them. And that's why we call the safety management system a living document. So what's in a safety management system? So it includes things like your safety policy, your fatigue policy, your drug and alcohol policy, any sort of commitments and objectives that you have for your business. You look at your management accountabilities and responsibilities and how those are communicated within the business. So someone might be responsible, for example, for the vehicles and the dispatch of particular vehicles. Someone else in the organisation might be responsible for driver training. So you would mark all of that out in your SMS. You would include your risk register in here as well and mitigate any risks. You would have your procedures and documentations that's associated with that risk register. So if a particular risk happens or, an incident occurs, what are the steps that happen to ensure that that is addressed? Any information about your drivers, and anybody that you contract or any other employees that you have within your business. And in this, you would include things like, looking at their any disqualifying offences, records around their criminal record checks, drug and alcohol, that sort of thing. Any education that you offer within your organisation, so that might be your safe loading and unloading of wheelchairs, any training that you provide on customer service, how they maintain safety, how they conduct themselves in the workplace, anything around sort of women's safety. So anything that you do to kind of educate your drivers or your employees would need to go into this SMS as well. Your incident and accident management and monitoring. So this includes your notifiable occurrences, and anything major that happens needs to be reported to point through the portal. And then your evaluation and review process of things as you go about. This is that concept around the living document that you're coming back to it regularly. Whether you schedule that in as a regular thing, or you just put a record like a diary of when you've come back and you've checked things and modified. The auditing process. So when auditors come, one of the main things that they'll be looking at is your safety management system, and having a look at your risk register and those sorts of things. Auditing is one of the main tools that the Commission uses to ensure compliance amongst the industry. Before the audit actually takes place, service providers will receive an audit notice so that you can prepare accordingly. And if you have questions and things that you need to ask to prepare for the audit, you can also reach out around that. Auditors are trained to consider difference and diversity in the industry. So they know that a taxi service provider's SMS is going to look very different to a CTO SMS. And so they'll be looking for those differences, and they'll be aware that, it's not all going to be a one size fits all. The audit process is meant to be a very positive experience. It's about providing you some education and some mentorship to make sure that you're meeting all of your obligations. During that process, your aim in the audit is to demonstrate that you're meeting all of your requirements, and our aim is that you obviously succeed. We want you to be a successful business. We want you to be providing services to the community. So we want you to do well in this, and that's why it will be a mentor type situation. It's not meant to be a negative, kind of experience. So once the audit takes place, you will sort of get a report back at the end of it, which kind of looks a bit like a traffic light system. Green, obviously, you've met all the controls and they're happy with what you've put in place. Yellow is that you've probably had some tuition in this space and you need to get a few things sort of fixed up and sorted out in preparation to make sure that your business is nice and safe. And then red flags that, potentially an improvement notice was issued and you need to have corrective action done within a particular period of time. To help you through the process of an audit, there is an audit or a safety audit tool that you can use, which is essentially like an Excel spreadsheet with a bit like a checklist that helps you to tick off all the things that you need to include so that there's no guessing. And the link to that is there. So some questions came through around the SMS. And so I'll go through and answer those now. And then if you have any other questions, I can answer that. Thanks, Marcus, for flagging that there's a question in the chat. I'll come to that as well. So what are mandatory industry-wide risks identified in the register as per 8.3.1.2 on the spreadsheet? The spreadsheet in this case is referring to the auditing tool. So basically this question is asking what are the mandatory industry-wide risks that have to be covered. And these 9 are, the first is violence. So that includes violence to the driver, to passengers or to third parties. So how are you going to mitigate this risk within your service? Any psychological risks that could occur during passenger services. So a prime example of that would be witnessing a serious incident, for example, or something quite negative happening, and what you're going to do for your service, what you're going to do for your service to ensure that those people that have witnessed that have had the right care following that, so whether you have an EAP and that sort of thing. Driver distraction. So, what are your policies and things on phones, use of the GPS, use of the radios, how they use booking apps, how are you going to ensure that they're using these safely so it doesn't become a driver distraction. Soliciting and touting. So this is illegal, for the taxi industry and for BSPs as well, and can result in legal action. Passenger pick up and set down. So ensuring that, your drivers are aware to set down at safe locations that are free from hazards, that they're making legal considerations like not stopping in a no stopping zone, making sure that WABs, are parking somewhere where there's a ramp, that sort of thing. Covering how to safely transport vulnerable passengers. So you'll be looking at your elderly here, passengers with assistance or service animals, and making sure that drivers are not refusing service to them. You might be looking at women's safety as well within that space, and looking at people with a disability. Fatigue, so that includes shift length, rest breaks, and what your secondary employment policy is. Drugs and alcohol. So, what are your policies on that? Making sure that you've got coverage for that and ensuring that none of your drivers are under the influence, and looking at driver behaviour, ensuring that they are also covering women's safety. And on that note, I'll also mention that on our website, we have a new women's safety toolkit with a set of guidelines within that. And that's something that you can use and add to your safety management systems. And the last question on the SMS was, what do you suggest is reasonable for point 7.1 and 7.2 for community transport organisations that don't book set vehicles and drivers until the day? So in this scenario, the way that you could address this is to list the ways you provide enough information once you have figured out allocation of, the vehicle and the driver for the passenger. So once that is determined, even if it is on the day, How are you providing identifiers once it's allocated? So do you send an SMS? Do you provide a phone call? Is there an automated dispatch notification that goes out? What identifiers are you using for the vehicle as well, so that the passenger knows that you know that they're going to be picked up by you, that they know to expect you at a certain time, they know what driver is coming. You might provide the name of the driver, the vehicle color, the make and model, the rego plate. So all those different things, those are things that you would list in your safety management system that would show that you're trying to communicate as much information as you can to the passenger. You will have your organization name most likely displayed on the vehicle, whether that's a logo or, you've got your retroreflective sign on the back. And within that, it would also be worth recording what your contingency plan is. If for whatever reason there's a change of vehicle or driver unexpectedly, how are you going to ensure that the passenger is alerted to those changes as those occur? So if you cover that kind of information, you would be meeting the requirements requested at 7.1 and 7.2.
Can I just jump in there, Danielle?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but Danielle and I had a conversation about this particular question, because you can see that at one extreme is the large rideshare organisations like Uber, where you make a booking and they send a thing through to your phone that says, here's a picture of the car, this is the name of the driver, and you can even look up, on his approach where he is, all of that sort of stuff. And that gets updated live, and the idea behind that is to make sure that, and it does sometimes happen, where if you're standing outside a pub looking at your phone, you want to make sure that you're getting in the Uber, it's actually that car, and there's a real safety risk there. That's kind of at one extreme, and you guys are almost at the other extreme, but the principle's the same. It's just letting someone know, this is the car, Dave's coming, he's turning up about 10, you know what the car looks like, it's got our name on the side. It's a phone call, it's as simple as that. Anywhere on that line, it would meet that requirement, depending obviously on the size of the business that you're running. And in Uber's case, there's a huge amount of information required, and they're a big business. But if you've only got one or two cars, it's a whole different thing. And you would just confirm, Andrew will be here, he'll be here at this particular time, wait out the front, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's some questions, so I'm going to jump into those in a second, but I just thought I'll flag here, just to end the presentation, that we do have plenty of resources on our website. We have a fact sheet specific for community transport. We have a self-assessment readiness for readiness guide to ensure that you're providing those safe and compliant passenger services. And there's more information around the passenger service levy as well. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see your questions. Okay. So Ken, is it just community transport providers that need to be authorised, or do CHSP grant agreement holders also need to be authorised? Yes, CHSP grant agreement holders do need to be authorised because of that changeover with the funding. You now come under point-to-point transport if you hadn't previously. So yes, you will be required to become authorised. The next question is, can I please confirm, if a driver fails the PT code test at Service New South Wales, does that mean they are no longer able to volunteer as a driver? I've not actually heard of that happening. Marcus, do you know anything about that? Yeah,
the reason what a driver needs to meet is they need to meet a medical, they need to pass a medical test to be able to drive. And you don't technically need to have the PT code, but it's generally the easiest way to prove that a driver is able to drive. So if they fail a PT code test, but then you do get a certificate, a medical okay from a doctor, I think that would probably work. I think that would be enough, because I think there's some places where the PT code doesn't cover as much as a full medical would. So we might need to get back to you on that, but I think As a general answer, I'd say yes, but I think you can, if you have a full medical and they pass that, I think that would mean that they'd be okay. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Are we required to ask our volunteers to go to Service New South Wales to get a driving record, or does the information on, or is the information on the DVD enough? I guess that's dependent on whether you want them to have the PT code or not. As long as you have collated as much information as you can about that driver, you should be fine. As I said, the PT code is not like mandatory, but it does make your checks easier in the DVD. It's more comprehensive. Yeah, I know it gets hard with volunteers in particular, because, you know, they're volunteering their time and don't want to ask too much of them. But as long as they've got, you know, a pretty clean driving record and you've got evidence of that, and they have passed a medical, then that should be fine.
Can I add a little bit more to that too, Danielle?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the purpose, so that the requirement of service providers is that they manage their drivers, and to be a driver, you need to, you know, meet a number of criteria, which Danielle was just talking about. You know, like there's the legal checks and the medical checks and that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of what you're trying to do. We need to manage our drivers, and these are all of the things. The DVD is just a tool that's provided by us to make that easier for you to manage your drivers. And so you can put all your drivers in there, you can manage them all and keep all of the information up to date in there if you choose. The only requirement is you can't put them in the DVD unless they have a PT code. So if you have a way of managing your drivers that works, you don't need to use the DVD. It just makes it easier. And, you know, it's just to help you do that. But like I say, that means then all your drivers need the PT code, which is why I answered the previous question the way I did. If you can manage your drivers and they meet all the requirements without using the DVD, that's fine. It's just that when you get to more drivers, you'll find the DVD actually helps. It makes it a lot easier.
I just went looking. There's a good table that we have that sort of breaks down all the different requirements that they need to have. But I might email that through after so that you can all have that just for your reference. So as long as they're ticking all of those boxes, then it should be fine. CHSP transport services are provided by support workers using their own vehicles. Are they required to have the retroreflective sign displayed? Yes, because they still technically, because they need to be authorised, they're technically booking service providers, and therefore they need to display the retroreflective sign by law. Even if it is their own vehicle.
Sorry to interrupt. We had this come up in one of the forums in the past couple of months, and talking about sort of how to manage it. And someone, and apologies if you're on here and I'm not giving you credit, mentioned potentially having like sort of suction signs so support workers can easily remove them, and that might be an easier way to manage it, because obviously they're not ride share for all of the time.
That's right.
Yeah, so Ken, I'm not sure if that helps or not, but that may be an easier way to manage it. I know you guys have a pretty massive fleet of, team of support workers.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a sticker. We often think about a sticker because it's an easier way to think about it. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Kate. It can just be a lick and stick on the thing when you're driving when you're doing the job, but then you can take it off when you're not.
Absolutely, yeah. Are there any other questions or anything that we haven't covered today that you would like covered or want more information on? No? I'm just going to pop my email into the chat. If something pops to mind after, please feel free to reach out and we can provide you with any guidance and things. And I'll send through, Kate, the presentation with the links and things in it, so that people have it as a reference point.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Marcus, I wasn't sure if you were joining today or not, so my apologies for not introducing you to start out with.
That's all right. I only sat in because Danielle's actually the expert on all of this, and I wanted to sit in and hear and listen to what she had to say so that I could learn.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us, and thank you sort of for helping out and providing a bit of update at some of the recent forums. The feedback that I've heard about that's been that it's been quite positive just to have a face and to sort of know how to get some answers to questions. So yeah, but thank you both for your time. I will get resources sent out soon, and yeah.
Thank you so much for having us and for joining us here today. We, we enjoy coming along to these sessions. We want to see everybody succeeding. So, it's really great to come along and to be present at these sessions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.